are highly sensitive? Okay. How many of you are not highly sensitive? Okay. And of those of you who are not, how many of you have no idea what I'm talking about when I say highly sensitive? Okay, I see uncertainty there. Okay, because the book is not written for highly sensitive people, but I realize it's in the title. The title of the book is, the main title is Spirituality Through a Highly Sensitive Lens. And that lens actually refers to me as a highly sensitive person, but the publishers had to have highly sensitive person in the title because they felt it would bring in more of my readership. So that's why we have that title. Title I wanted for the book was Spirituality or Whatever. Because I hope there are some people here, and I mean, this is a place where people are spiritual, but some people may have come here in spite of that, because I think this talk is equally applicable to people who are atheists, agnostics, hate this idea of spirituality. It's really not about that, especially, although I realize most people are comfortable with the term spirituality. But I'll just say a little bit about highly sensitive people so that you feel complete, and anybody else here. A highly sensitive person, about 25-30% of the population of humans, but also you find about that percentage in most animals too. There are sensitive dogs and sensitive horses and sensitive fruit flies and sensitive fish, sensitive baboons, the whole gamut, sensitive, because it's a survival strategy that is adopted by a certain percentage. If everybody in a population adopted it, it would be no use to anybody. You get the analogy I always use is if there's a shortcut, if everybody uses the shortcut, it's not a shortcut anymore. So sensitive people notice things, and the four things about the trait, the most important thing, is depth of processing. They notice things and think about and reflect on it more than other people. You might think, well, that's a good thing to do, but what if you reflect on things that are pointless? The example I give is if you go to the races and you notice that the winning horse in the first race, the jockey wore red, and the second race, the winning horse, the jockey, was also wearing red, you start betting on red jockeys, you're going to start losing money because you paid attention to the wrong thing. So paying attention isn't always an advantage, but most of the time it's a pretty good idea. Now, unfortunately, there's one negative side to the trait. I'm telling you, 4 letters, D-O-E-S. The negative side is the O. You get easily overstimulated. If you're going to pay attention to everything, you're going to get more burned out. Then the E is for emotional responsiveness and empathy. We tend to be emotionally responsive. I'm not going to say overreacting, but we have more emotions than other people generally, and that helps us to process things. If you don't care about something, you don't process it. The last letter is S for sensitive to subtleties. So you just notice things that other people don't notice. So a couple more letters we should tack on is differential susceptibility, DS for differential susceptibility, because highly sensitive people are more affected by their environments, both as children and as adults. And this is for better and for worse. We're affected in childhood by really good parenting, and we're affected negatively by very bad parenting. And when we grow up, with jobs and places we live and all that, we really thrive in the good spots and don't do so well in not so good ones. We get a lot from interventions. So it's not hopeless, because we can always get some therapy or be in whatever that helps us to get over whatever the effects were of a negative environment. So that's that. That's high sensitivity. The reason, I went along with the highly sensitive lens is the book I've written is something I thought somebody should have written ages ago, which is an objective book about meditation methods and enlightenment. And most, you can find books, somebody got enlightened and writes a book about how they did it, or you can find books on various approaches, most of them Eastern, Buddhism or something about from India or from Hinduism or like TM or mindfulness, all these different things. But there's always a proponent of that thing, but there's nobody, if you go to them and say, well, if you ask a TM teacher, well, what about Buddhism? They don't really know. And if you ask a mindfulness person about TM, they won't give you a very good answer because they don't know. So my feeling is that people ought to have a choice. Most people sort of stumble into doing the thing that they stumbled into and then stay with it because somebody convinced them. And that's fine, but then that's a shame if it's not quite the right thing for you. My feeling is I'm not proselytizing about anything. I just want people to be able to make choices. And I do think what the right thing is for people, it differs for different people. Enlightenment, I am totally confident that this state exists and that it's not impossible. There are lots of people who are enlightened. What am I talking about? I'm talking about a permanent state of inner calm and equanimity that generally follows after a certain number of years of meditating, but it also, for many people, it happens suddenly. If you've heard of Eckhart Tolle with his famous book about the power of now, he was totally depressed and one morning woke up totally in bliss. And that does happen to people. Some people come into it through a lot of sort of physical stuff that starts sort of. So one of the problems is I can't tell you exactly how to get enlightened, but my book goes through a lot of material on that. And the main thing is I'm confident it's there, and I'm confident that more and more people are getting enlightened, and therefore we're going to learn more as we get more scientific research on these people as that evolves. There's no grants at the moment for that, but there will be eventually. But I also want to say something very important, which is that many of you in the room may have had an amazing experience in your life that just changed your life. And it's not ongoing, permanent in what I just said. It's not something that's there all the time, but it changed your life. So in that sense, it's still there. It's there all the time. I know Shari, whom I wanted to just comment on as the person who's doing this YouTube for us, told me about an experience she had that was like that, was just really life-changing. I like to tell the story of a friend of mine who's passed now. She was older than I, but she told me about when she was a little girl, her father had died and her mother was dying. And she was just, I don't know how old she was, maybe about 10. And she had a dream one night of heaven. And she woke up, wow, that was pretty nice. Next night, she had the same dream. She woke up and thought, Third night, she had the same dream, and she woke up and she was changed. She said, this is not just a dream. I mean, even a little girl can get it. Somebody's trying to tell her something, or something's happening to her. And it's interesting, in the U.S. in 1960, and the Gallup poll, they asked people, how many people on a scale of 1 to 5 have answered 5 on the question, have you had a profound religious or spiritual experience or awakening that changed the direction of your life forever? 20% of people said that in 1962, and in 2002, 40% of people said that. So I'm confident that there are people in this room who've had experiences of some type like that. And I don't want to put that down or make that seem like less to anybody. It's profound, and we can all be grateful. But I think it's also interesting, the number doubled. And that's because something is going on. I think it has to do with the fact that we have the East and the West, like two hemispheres of the brain. And in the 1960s, all of a sudden, Eastern teachers came West in numbers. We had the Zen teachers, we had TM, we had the people who taught Buddhist mindfulness meditation. And all of a sudden, people were starting to meditate, lots of them. And some of them stopped, we know, but some stuck with it. And now, after so many years, they're starting to have these awakening or enlightenment experiences. I use both of those words interchangeably because you find them both out there. And if you want to look, boy, if you want to Google awakening or enlightenment, you will find so many books and so many webcasts and so many people who have the story for you on how to do it and who can tell you exactly how it feels. And there's so much of it, it's very overwhelming. But the thing to realize is that it's happening. It's happening, and that means it could happen to you if it hasn't already. And it could have happened to you already and you have never had a term for it, because some people have had it happen and then, what was that? And have been afraid to talk about it even because they feel so changed. And it's important to clarify that I'm going to give you a list of qualities of enlightenment, but just to be sure that you understand, there's an archetype about enlightenment which we don't want to get projecting onto people because it's not a state of perfection. In fact, if anybody wants to ask me, I will talk at length, because that's my chapter 2 in my book, about the number of spiritual teachers in all religions, in all traditions, who have abused their power sexually or financially. That doesn't sound like enlightenment. Were they none of them enlightened? Well, that's an interesting topic, but I'll just to make a long story short, I think you can be, Ken Wilber makes this point that you can wake up, but you may need to still clean up your baloney, your stuff from your childhood and all that, and grow up in terms of the way that you see people in general. He makes the example that during World War II, Zen Buddhists who were probably enlightened, Zen Buddhist priests, were all for the Japanese going and killing people because they believed that what was right for the Japanese was right for the was right, because they had not grown up in Ken Wilber's sense of advancing beyond thinking about your individual group and advancing towards a sort of a world consciousness, which has taken time for us to get. He points out the human race is just only gave up slavery a couple hundred years ago. So we evolve in that area too. So you can find, if you look in the history, all these waking up traditions, women not treated so well, untouchables or whatever, not treated so well. So enlightenment is not perfection, but it is something pretty special. And I just want to say something else too, because many of you will probably be thinking, well, I don't know why I came to this, because this is going to happen to me. Well, there's an interesting story about the Dalai Lama that some psychologist, he's always having psychologists come and visit him. And somebody was telling him about how so much in therapy in the West, people have low self-esteem. They don't feel good about themselves. He said, what? What is that? And that was just something that you don't see among Tibetans, this low self-esteem. Obviously, we're in a very competitive, ranking kind of environment, and some issues probably about how we're raised too as children. But the point is that you do have to believe this is possible for you. It's very important, because I think making it a priority is part of what makes it happen. And it's been in every culture, all mystics of every religious tradition and even non-religious mystics, but it does seem to be coming more from the East, where they've really specialized in that. So in my book, I give a lot of the research, including the brain research, but I just want to give you, there's a couple men who did interviews with enlightened people, and one, his name is Steve Taylor, and he wrote a book called The Shift, and he interviewed about 30 people and produced a list of the qualities that were in most of them. Not everyone's true for everyone. There's a lot of variation in the way that people are awake or enlightened, but probably, I'm going to go through the list quickly, but the most important one is that the self, the small self, the ego, shrinks. And that's weird. It's like it dissolves a little bit or a lot. And then that sort of causes the other things, because in the calmness, a lot of the calmness is the fact that things just don't matter as much to your ego. You're not as upset by things. You can still feel fear and anger, but they're less, they're not as much, and you mostly feel this equanimity instead. You do feel positive emotions, but not as intensely, and your desires are not as strong. You're less worried about your reputation, about others' opinions, less worried about your own death. Your attitudes tend to spontaneously change. You have less need to push your own views. There's a heightened sense of right and wrong. At the center of this is a compassion for others. How many of you have ever heard of the woman, the Peace Pilgrim? Her name was actually, Mildred Norman, but Steve Taylor takes her as an example because from her biographical writing or autobiographical writing, it's clear that she was enlightened. But she's someone who, to get the facts right, she walked 25,000 miles wearing just a tunic that declared her mission to the world, which was peace, in front and back. She carried no money. She slept outside. She counted on strangers for food and to take care of her. This was not martyrdom. She found it a pure joy. So, enlightenment changes people. Not always in that way, but the point is you may find that you see things differently and other people see you as a bit eccentric, possibly. You're not easily bored. You identify less with groups. You're not moved as much by social pressure. Socially, people see you as kind. You have a much deeper appreciation of the world around you, a sense of being in the present, and life is just easier. Things that you need tend to just happen. If there's a problem, it's easily solved, or you find out it was better that didn't happen to you anyway, it turns out. So I can see some laughing because a lot of people have made a lot of progress towards these states, and they don't always actually identify it as such. So I'll give you another example of this man, Jeffrey Martin. Any of you heard of Jeffrey Martin on the internet? Okay, well, he's around. He was a Silicon Valley billionaire, and he found that with all his money, he still wasn't happy. So he decided to try to find out if anybody was happy. And he found out that there were these people who were enlightened, who were happy. So he ended up interviewing over 1,000 people who other people had said were enlightened, so that it wasn't just self-chosen people. And he tries to use sort of not spiritual kind of terms, persistent, non-symbolic experience. And he's, again, talks about changes. Again, first of all, changes in thinking. There's just less and less thinking. A reduction of as much as 90% of thoughts. And yet people thought their thinking had improved, but they just didn't think very much about themselves. Their feelings the intensity of feelings were reduced. Their perception, objects, and situations seemed brighter. About memory, fewer memories came to mind. So it's very similar to Taylor's findings. Central to all this was this changed sense of self. It was though it had expanded in a sense, but also that it had almost disappeared. And although his interviewees felt enormously changed, those around these people said they saw very little change in their personalities unless there was a change in like depression just dropping away or a dramatic shift in their political views or their religious views. They also found that talking about their changes sometimes irritated people, other people, their friends, or annoyed people or frightened people who dismissed it as a disorder. So many of these people just didn't talk about it because they found it better not to. So, there you go. Now, some of you may now be thinking, okay, how do I get enlightened? And here's the tough part. I've read a lot, and it's not clear. Jeffrey Martin has tried to turn what he calls seekers into finders by giving a course. And he says he's got 65% of the people who take his course move from seekers to finders. But we don't have any established measures of the brains of these people, and I can get into that. There is somebody who does brain research on it, but Jeffrey Martin has not so far cooperated with that. But his thing is that you tell people about 1 week modules of different methods, and then you find the one that works for you and you pursue that. So whatever works for you is his bottom line about that. I like to sail with my grandson, who is 16. We're quite the pair, the 81-year-old and the 16-year-old. It was even better when it was exactly 6 times difference and 6 times younger. But anyway, people are always saying, "You're too young to sail, and you're too old to sail." But I also like to read about sailing. There's a book called Maiden Voyage about this 19-year-old whose father said, "You can either sail or go to college." So she said, "I guess I'll sail around the world in this little boat." So, but the interesting thing about all these books about single-handed sailing, and there are a lot of people who do it. My grandson wants to sail around the world and start with sailing to Hawaii, is that, say you're sailing from London to New York City. You can read accounts about it, but you can see what I'm going to say. I can't tell you exactly how to do it because every trip is different. The weather is different. The things in your boat will break, and then you have to fix those or you can't fix them. And all kinds of things happen to people while they're sailing. And we're in that place. We ought to be in steamships by now about enlightenment. We should be able to get from London to New York with some efficiency, but we don't have it yet. And I think the East has not been that successful either. There's some people get enlightened, but other people don't. But they're a lot more successful, of course, than here, where this is all new for us. And now we take science and we apply it to what they have to say. We're gonna make some progress. But I wish I could tell you more. I really wish I could. There's certainly a lot of people out there who will tell you exactly what to do. But I'm not going to do that. I'm just, in the book, I lay out what I found so far. How many people here feel like they sort of know what I'm talking about? They've either, yeah, okay, well, that's a lot of people. That's very good. So I'm not here to convert anybody, but I do want to tell you that it's real, and that I do think that the more you make it a priority in your life to try to figure out how to get there, the better, the more likely you are to make it. And there are more and more people. It's quite interesting. So, what does meditation have to do with enlightenment? Why did I put them in the same book? Well, because all the meditation methods from the East all have the same purpose: enlightenment, nirvana, awakening. They were not there. So the teachers, like Maharishi says, he came from the East to the West to enlighten people, and he found what people wanted was a good night's sleep. The opposite, like, So you'll hear a lot about meditation as being good for creativity, good for blood pressure, good for calm, good for relationships. It's good for all those things, but that's not the point of it. That's why I put the two into the same book. And my point was to give people an understanding of meditation, because if meditation is going to be your path, you really ought to pick the path that is right for you. And I'm not talking about meditation to go to sleep. I'm not talking about guided meditation. We use the term for many, many things. I'm talking about eyes closed meditation that is for the point of, if you look back in the tradition, the point was always enlightenment. And so now we've located 3 different kinds of meditation according to what happens in the brain when you do it. And so, great, you already now can make a distinction. If somebody tells you about their method of meditation, you can listen and say, oh, it's a that, or it's one of those. Okay, so one is focused attention, which is like concentration. And the brain waves are going to be beta or gamma. Your brain's going to do what happens typically in a brain when you're focused on something, when you're concentrating. You're trying to keep your attention on something. Most, but not all Buddhist meditation involves focused attention, and some mantra meditations from India involve concentrating on the mantra. The second kind is open monitoring, which is brain waves are theta. And all this is in my book, so you don't have to try to remember this, but typically found when monitoring some internal process. And the one we all think of with meditation is the breath. So you'll get theta brain waves as you monitor your breathing. And this is a more relaxed brain than the focused attention. It's a specific type of Buddhist meditation that Buddha taught to prepare you for focused meditation. So you calm the mind, you get used to focusing on your breath in order to focus harder on something more important. And we might not get that far into Buddhism today, but a little bit anyway. So that's typical of Buddhist meditation. The third kind is automatic self-transcending. These are all from somebody's article about this. Typical of this is alpha 1 waves. So you've all heard of alpha. For a while in the 60s, everybody was trying to use biofeedback machines to raise their alpha waves, because alpha is the state of relaxed alertness. So you just, very lovely feeling. Okay, so this is a kind of meditation that is the most effortless. And it's typical of TM, which is a kind of mantra meditation from India, and also Christian centering prayer, which is kind of based on that, and something else called Christian meditation, which is also based on that. So it creates a very relaxed state. So those are 3 kinds of meditation. If you've learned to meditate, you should be able now to say, I was doing that and I was producing that in my brain. Sometimes people do both. They start with one and then shift into the other, or their meditation seems to shift. But those are the ways the brain behaves when you're meditating. Now, there are 2 other categories that are different. This is according to the way that the method gets you enlightened, or hopes to get you enlightened. What method? So one is called, by the author of this, it's a little tongue-in-cheek, but I'll use the term, practice makes perfect, which is that the practice that you're doing is intended to make you more like an enlightened person until you get there. So you're practicing in order to become perfect. And Buddhism is pretty much based on this, but other methods are too. You're trying to become more enlightened by thinking the way that an enlightened person does. An enlightened person can focus their attention, for instance, and they can monitor their body. They're aware of what's going on in their body. So these are, and I end up in my book focusing on 4 kinds of Buddhist meditation, because there's so many kinds, but I focused on Zen, Tibetan, Vipassana, which is Vipassana or insight meditation, the same terms, which is what you do after you've mastered mindfulness, and the kind of mindfulness that Thich Nhat Hanh talked about, and that's the Plum Village tradition. Because Buddha lived in 600 BC, and boy, at the minute he was dead, the information went in all directions with different teachers, with different views. And because not everybody was getting enlightened, everybody had different views and new methods and all this. We don't even know for sure. We know something of what he taught, because in those days you didn't write stuff down, you just listened. But as soon as he died, somebody started writing. So we have a pretty good idea of what he said. So there's practice makes perfect, and that was essentially trying to figure out what Buddha did, and Buddha trying to figure out what he did, so that people could get there, because he got there. And a really good book about him, I think, is Karen Armstrong's book, Buddha, which tries to be as scientifically accurate as possible about what we know. And I think it's a helpful book if you're interested in Buddha himself, given the long time lapse from when he lived. Okay, so the other approach to enlightenment is called state enlivening, which means that you're trying to experience pure consciousness in meditation. You're trying to, I have to say something here about Buddhism to help. With nirvana, the actual final state is a state in which you take nothing seriously. It's all impermanence. I'll go into the Four Noble Truths probably in a minute, but nirvana is achieved by achieving a kind of a beyond, something deep in your mind is beyond all this. You're still here, you're still active in it, but you're beyond all this. How do you get there? Well, you have to meditate on these certain things according to Buddha. Well, the state enlivening approach is simply go to that place of pure consciousness and in meditation. So you go quieter and quieter and quieter until it's empty. Some Zen meditation is the same thing. I went to Tassajara Hot Springs, and they sort of taught me how to meditate in their place. And one of the things they taught was simply sit with your eyes open, looking at the wall, and just watch and wait until you experience pure consciousness. It's not a common technique in Zen, but it is one of them. And Tibetan Buddhism also, some of them, Mahamudra, Dan Brown's written a book about that. He talks about it. At a certain point, you get to what is called unsupported meditation, in which you simply are there, but you've already had some taste of pure consciousness, but now you can simply be there. So, but the metaphor here that makes sense is it's like in meditation, you dip your mind into this state, and then you come out into activity, and it fades away. But then you dip it, and then you fade it. So you meditate. With TM, it would be twice a day for 20 minutes, or with Time Pass, you might get some kind of program where you would do more, or you would go all these methods, like to have people go on retreats, because in the West, we're in a very stressful environment normally, so retreats are the best place to get deeper experiences. But the point is that you go in and then you come out, you go in and you come out until it sticks. And I have made a lot of use of a website called Buddha at the Gas Pump. Anybody heard of Buddha at the Gas Pump? Okay, that's a great place. He's done over 700 interviews now of people. He lives in Fairfield, Iowa, which is where Maharishi had all these TM meditators go there in order to live in one place and meditate together and change the world. A lot of people went there, thousands of them, but after a decade or two, a lot of them felt, I was supposed to be enlightened by now. And Rick said, I think there are a lot of people in this community who are enlightened, they're just not talking about it. So he called Buddha at the gas pump, because you might be standing next to somebody at the gas pump who's enlightened, who's your pal, and he's been here all this time, but nobody realized that this person was enlightened. And the tradition of how much you talk about whether you're enlightened is a big deal, which we can talk about. I kind of think it's good for people to be talking about it, because otherwise how are other people going to get encouraged? I'll just tell you a little bit about it, because Buddhists will not talk about it very much. And the reason, I was curious, so I decided to look it up. Good old Google, right? So it turns out that when Buddha was around, there were some people who were enlightened and some people who were not. But you go out with your alms bowl, you don't take food, you're given it. You don't buy food, you just take what you're given. This is part of the impermanence, is kind of giving up on certain things like greediness or desire. So that's a tradition. But they found that if somebody was enlightened and everybody knew it, the people who were giving out alms tended to give more to the people who were enlightened. It wasn't good. It was clearly a bad idea. So you actually take a vow, if you're a monk or a nun, in most Buddhist traditions, not to talk about your state. You can talk about it to your teacher, but you don't talk about it amongst each other And that sort of has gotten out into the environment. You can see, like I said, some people found that when they talked about it, people just thought they were crazy or whatever. So there's a lot of tradition not to talk about it, and I think that was true in Fairfield. Also, it's just hard to know for sure, because normally if you're in a monastery or something, you'd go to your teacher and you'd ask. But TM teachers are not really that kind of teacher that much. Maharishi was not available to everybody, so there's a lot of videos of him talking about what enlightenment is, but you still, there's a good book I talk about him, he's kind of a friend of mine, Robert Foreman. His book is called Enlightenment Ain't All It's Cracked Up to Be. And he became enlightened while he was on a course with Maharishi in Mallorca, Spain, but he didn't know for sure if he was or not, and he didn't want to go and talk about it to Maharishi. So afterwards, he was somewhere, he decided eventually to study comparative religion, and he kept having these experiences. He was sitting somewhere in a hallway with Ram Dass, the guy who wrote Be Here Now, who definitely is enlightened. And he talked about it, and Ram Dass said, yeah, you're enlightened. So it really helps to have somebody to tell you whether you're actually there or not. So anyway, how did I get off onto all of that? About Rick Archer and Buddha at the Gas Pump. And there you get people talking, the people who are willing to talk with him. You get people first in the Fairfield community and saying, well, I walked out on the porch one day after meditating and boom. So people were talking about their experiences. Then after about 42 interviews, he started talking to some Buddhists. And then he started talking to everybody. And I think the whole TM movement sort of said, Rick, you've gone off. But he didn't care. So he's done 700 plus interviews. They're not always enlightened people, and he's gone off into all kinds of things, like lots of near-death experiences, but all kinds of stuff. But it's a good place to learn and to see how much this has grown. So he started in around 2009, 2010. Steve Taylor wrote his book, did his dissertation right about then. Jeffrey Martin right about then. Something happened about then where there's just more and more information now. So how am I doing for time? Oh, pretty good. Okay. So the state enlivening thing is one thing. Another analogy that they use about enlightenment is that there's a pure consciousness is like a screen. In the old-fashioned days, movies were projected onto a screen, and what you're seeing there is all this activity on the screen. You don't see the screen itself, which is silvery white, unless you turned off the activity. So in meditation, you turn down the activity and you see the pure consciousness, you see the screen. And I think I'm doing pretty good here. I just want to be certain that you understand that, oddly enough, there's a kind of a split here between Buddhism and the Advaita Vedanta tradition from India. Buddha came from India, but he rejected a lot of what was called sort of Brahman, a lot, okay. It's a little hard to explain, but in the Indian tradition, you experience as you meditate something that feels kind of like fullness, and it's almost like bliss, not an emotion of bliss, but it's a fullness. To Buddha, that was a state you might get attached to. He said he went beyond that, so that you don't get attached to any nice state. So the bottom line is you can't quite equate these two traditions, because there's a kind of a fullness in this Indian tradition and a fullness of emptiness in the Buddhist tradition.